Daniel sat alone in his dimly lit apartment, the rain tapping against the window like a relentless reminder of his isolation. He had grown accustomed to silence, but tonight the quiet felt different, charged, as if something long buried was rising to the surface. His trembling hands opened a small wooden box he had avoided for years. Inside, folded with care, lay a yellowed letter sealed with his father's handwriting, a man he believed had abandoned him forever. His chest tightened, every breath jagged with anticipation and fear. "Why now?" Daniel whispered, his voice breaking into the hollow room. The moment he tore the fragile seal, the words cut into him like glass. His father had not left by choice. He had been protecting Daniel from a truth darker than Daniel could imagine. His heart pounded, each sentence unraveling everything he thought he knew about himself. The letter ended with one line that echoed in his skull. "Find the truth within, my son, before it consumes you." Daniel dropped the letter, his hands trembling, his world collapsing, as the storm outside roared in unison with the storm within. Daniel sat frozen in the aftermath of the letter, staring at the paper lying on the floor as if it were a ghost come alive. Every memory of his father clashed violently with the truth revealed. He thought of the years of silence, the birthdays spent alone, the crushing belief that he had been unwanted. Now those wounds split open with a cruel twist, showing he had been loved but also shielded from something unimaginable. His chest rose and fell rapidly, each breath harder to contain. He whispered, "Why did you hide this from me, Father?" The rain outside howled like a grieving chorus, echoing his torment. His mind replayed the last day he saw his father's face, blurred by childhood tears. Was it a farewell of choice or of sacrifice? His fists clenched as he realized the truth had not freed him, but chained him with questions more unbearable than the silence before. The storm outside was no longer weather. It was a mirror of the chaos within, raging against his fragile grip on reality. Daniel rose to his feet, pacing across the room as if movement could calm the storm inside his chest. The letter's words burned in his mind, impossible to escape. He could hear his father's voice, distant and cracked, echoing through his memory like a ghost trapped between realms. "Find the truth within." The phrase was not guidance, it was a command, a plea, a desperate final cry. His hands dragged across the dusty bookshelves, knocking aside forgotten mementos of a past life. He felt the weight of abandonment clash with the possibility of hidden protection, a paradox that left him gasping. His reflection in the window startled him, eyes wild, face pale, shoulders hunched with despair. The storm's lightning illuminated him like a stranger he no longer recognized. For the first time, Daniel felt fear not just of his past, but of himself. He whispered, "What truth could destroy us so completely?" His words dissolved into the sound of thunder, swallowed by the night. The room felt unbearably small, suffocating with the letter's presence. Daniel snatched it from the floor, his fingers tightening until the fragile paper nearly tore. The words seemed alive, whispering to him like echoes of betrayal. His father's voice echoed again in his head, faint yet undeniable, "Before it consumes you." Fear coiled in Daniel's stomach, and he staggered backward into the wall, sliding down until he sat on the cold floorboards. His thoughts spiraled into shadows, conjuring images of his father hiding in fear, chased by unseen forces. Daniel felt that every moment of neglect, every unanswered question, had been pieces of a puzzle too dark to solve. He muttered, "Was I a son to protect, or a burden to conceal?" The storm outside wailed like a living thing, pressing against the walls, demanding entry. Daniel buried his face in his hands, the weight of his father's truth settling like chains on his shoulders, binding him tighter with every heartbeat. Hours felt like minutes as Daniel remained locked in his turmoil, staring blankly at the fragile paper in his lap. His father's secret was a curse, not a gift. For years he had survived believing he had been abandoned, and though painful, that belief gave him stability. Now he knew that the truth was something darker, a shadow large enough to consume both memory and future. His chest ached, every breath heavy, as though the storm outside had filled the room with water. You should have left me in ignorance, he whispered bitterly, voice cracking. Yet in that same moment, another part of him stirred, a spark of defiance that refused to drown. His father's command was not a warning to surrender but a demand to fight. Daniel's grief turned inward, reshaping into a fragile resolve. If truth was a storm, then he had no choice but to walk into its heart. Daniel woke to the pale light of morning creeping through torn curtains, the storm gone yet leaving behind an eerie silence. He sat hunched on the edge of his bed, the letter still in his hand, a relic of pain and revelation. The words felt etched into his skin, whispering reminders of abandonment and hidden truths. Memories flooded back of nights he waited by the door as a child, clutching hope that his father might return. Each night ended the same, with silence too loud to bear. Now, as he stared at his reflection in the cracked mirror, he saw not a grown man but the same boy, fragile and yearning. His voice trembled as he muttered, "Why should I care any more?" Yet deep within, a part of him still longed for connection, still reached for the father he thought had vanished. The letter had cracked open, wounds he never allowed himself to heal. He could no longer pretend. The truth had chained itself to his soul, and he knew his journey had only just begun. Daniel wandered into the kitchen, his bare feet dragging against the cold floor tiles, the silence heavier than any storm. He reached for a chipped mug, pouring stale coffee that tasted like ash on his tongue. The bitterness mirrored the weight in his chest. He glanced at the empty chair across the table, once reserved for his father, an image frozen from childhood breakfasts long gone. The ghost of memory replayed. His father's laughter, the warmth of presence, a fleeting sense of safety that dissolved into absence. Daniel's hand trembled as he set down the mug, whispering, "Did you ever love me? Or was it all a lie?" His own voice startled him, fragile and raw. He realized he had never said those words aloud. The chair remained empty, the silence unbroken, and Daniel understood that this quest was not just about truth, but about love lost, love denied, and love still desperately sought. Later that day, Daniel stepped outside for the first time since the storm, the streets still slick with rain. The city moved around him with indifference, cars hissing by, strangers lost in their own stories. He walked slowly, head lowered, clutching the letter inside his jacket as though it might dissolve if let go. Every glance at families, fathers with children, stabbed at his heart with longing and envy. He remembered standing in a park once, watching fathers play catch with sons, wondering if he had done something to lose that privilege. "Was I unworthy of love?" he whispered, eyes fixed on the pavement. The letter's truth clashed with the memory of absence, and the contradictions gnawed at him. He felt small against the world, like a boy wandering in an adult's skin. Yet with each step, the ache deepened into resolve. He would not hide from the emptiness anymore. He would search, even if the answers destroyed him. As evening fell, Daniel returned home, his clothes damp with mist, his spirit no lighter than before. He laid the letter on the table once more, smoothing its wrinkled edges with a gentleness that surprised him. He traced his father's handwriting with his fingertip, a connection to a man both lost and found. In that moment, he felt the fragile thread binding them, stretched but not broken. "You wanted me to find myself," Daniel whispered, "but why through pain?" His voice trembled between anger and longing. He felt the presence of his father in every word, but the silence between sentences screamed louder. Daniel realized the letter was not closure but a doorway, one he had no choice but to walk through. His reflection in the window returned his gaze, but this time he saw not just despair. He saw the faintest spark of purpose, a glimmer urging him to step forward. Night wrapped itself around the city once again, but Daniel did not retreat into numbness. He sat by the window, the letter beside him, watching the lights flicker in distant buildings. Each light, he thought, belonged to a life, a story, a truth that shaped someone's world. His own truth, buried in his father's words, demanded to be uncovered. He remembered the last time he heard his father's voice in person, a memory faded but filled with urgency. It was not abandonment. It had been something else. "I will not let your silence define me," Daniel whispered firmly. For the first time in years, his voice carried strength instead of despair. He felt the ache of longing, but also a fragile determination, rising from the cracks. The night outside no longer mocked him. It seemed to listen. His journey to self-knowledge had begun, not with peace, but with defiance against the shadows of silence. Daniel found himself pacing through the crowded city streets, the letter folded in his pocket like a burning coal he could not discard. Every face he passed seemed to carry secrets of their own, shadows lingering behind their smiles. He thought of his father's silence, now transformed into a riddle that tormented him. The truth was no longer a question of love but of survival, and the weight of not knowing pressed on him like a curse. "What were you hiding from me?" he whispered to the night, his words swallowed by passing traffic. He felt anger swell, sharp and unfamiliar, carving through the layers of grief. The storm had passed, but inside him another had begun, one that roared against the walls he had built to contain his pain. His father's words echoed again, urging him toward answers he was afraid to find. He realized his journey forward would not be guided by comfort, but by wounds, every step cutting deeper. Later, Daniel sat on a park bench beneath a flickering streetlight, the quiet of night pressing against his chest. Around him, laughter of distant families echoed faintly, stirring old wounds. He remembered being a boy on this very bench, waiting for a father who never came. The memory merged with the present, suffocating him. "You lied," Daniel muttered bitterly, though he was unsure whether the accusation was aimed at his father or himself. The letter had shifted his pain from abandonment to betrayal, and betrayal cut deeper. He clenched his fists, nails digging into his palms, as if pain could anchor him. A gust of wind lifted leaves around his feet, and he stared into the darkness, feeling it stare back. The doubt that haunted him spoke like a voice in his head, whispering that his search was futile. For the first time, Daniel wondered if the truth was not meant to heal but to destroy. The following morning, Daniel visited the library, chasing fragments of his father's past through yellowed records and dusty archives. His hands trembled as he turned brittle pages, names and dates blurring together. He felt the silence of the room pressing down, the weight of history too heavy to hold. In every line of forgotten ink, he searched for proof that his father had been more than a shadow. "Tell me something," Daniel whispered to the paper, though the silence mocked him. His reflection in the glass cabinet seemed older, more worn, as if time itself was conspiring against him. The truth eluded him like smoke slipping through his fingers. Frustration gnawed at his resolve, anger threatening to consume what little strength he had. Yet the deeper he dug, the more he felt the pull of something just beyond reach, a thread in the darkness that begged to be unraveled. As night fell, Daniel returned to his apartment, carrying nothing but exhaustion. He dropped into a chair, the letter staring back at him from the table like a silent adversary. His hands shook as he picked it up, reading it again and again, until the words blurred into torment. His father's message was both a gift and a curse, demanding a search for answers without offering a path. Daniel's anger boiled, spilling into the empty room. "You left me with nothing but questions," he cried, voice cracking. His rage echoed, but the walls gave no reply. He slammed his fist against the table, the sound shattering the silence like glass. His chest heaved, and he realized the truth was not only hidden in the world, but buried within his own wounds. For the first time, he understood his greatest enemy was not absence but himself. That night, Daniel dreamt of shadows. His father's voice echoed from the darkness, distorted, calling his name like a plea. Figures emerged in his mind, faceless and cold, surrounding him with doubt. He ran, but the ground gave way beneath him, plunging him into emptiness. His chest burned as the words from the letter reappeared, glowing against the void. "Find the truth within." He screamed into the darkness, but no sound escaped. He awoke, gasping, sweat drenching his skin, the room spinning as though reality itself was fragile. The dream lingered like a warning, a reminder that his battle was no longer only external. His shadow had risen, demanding recognition. He realized his father had not just left him a secret, he had left him a mirror. To survive this path, Daniel would need to face the darkness within himself before it consumed everything. Days blurred into nights as Daniel chased fragments of the past, searching through records, asking questions, following trails that always ended in silence. One evening, a breakthrough arrived in the form of an old photograph mailed anonymously, his father standing beside a man Daniel did not recognize. The stranger's face was stern, eyes sharp with secrets. On the back of the photo, a single name was scrawled: Samuel Hayes. The name struck him with force, pulling at something half-remembered from whispered arguments between his parents. "Who are you?" Daniel whispered, clutching the photograph until the edges cut into his hand. The realization dawned. His father had not vanished because of indifference, but because of something or someone powerful. The silence had not been abandonment, it had been protection. For the first time, Daniel sensed the truth was not buried in the past alone, but tied to people still living. Driven by restless energy, Daniel tracked Samuel Hayes through public records, discovering a trail of business dealings that smelled of corruption and secrecy. His father had once worked with this man, but something had severed that bond. In newspaper clippings, Daniel found Hayes' name linked to scandals and whispered rumors of betrayal. His chest tightened as he realized the storm that consumed his father had not been imagined. The truth had been poisoned by powerful hands. "You knew something," Daniel muttered, his voice breaking, "and you paid the price for it." For the first time, grief shifted into purpose. The letter was no longer a plea but a map pointing him toward the shadows his father had fought. His search was not only for his father's story, but for the wisdom hidden in betrayal. The past was bleeding into the present, and Daniel could feel the weight of a revelation pressing closer. Late that night, Daniel spread the evidence across his table: the photograph, clippings, scribbled notes. His hands shook as he connected pieces of a puzzle his father had hidden. He saw the threads: betrayal, power, protection, sacrifice. His father's absence had not been choice, but consequence. Daniel whispered, "You gave up everything to keep me safe." The anger he had carried cracked, replaced by grief too heavy to contain. For years he had cursed his father's silence, but now he saw it was love buried beneath suffering. Yet with revelation came fear. If his father had been silenced by secrets, would the same fate hunt him now? He felt a chill crawl across his skin as the lamp flickered. His father's words echoed with new meaning: "Find the truth within, before it consumes you." Daniel realized the danger was no longer past, it was present, and it was his. The next day, Daniel sought out one of his father's old acquaintances, an elderly woman named Margaret, who had once worked beside him. Her frail hands trembled as she revealed truths Daniel had never imagined. "Your father didn't leave you," she whispered. "He fought to protect you." She spoke of Samuel Hayes, a man who thrived on power and betrayal, who had turned against his father when he refused to be corrupted. Margaret's eyes filled with sorrow as she recounted how Daniel's father had sacrificed his own name and presence to shield his son from Hayes' reach. Daniel felt his heart shatter. The story he had lived, the story of abandonment, had been a lie. Tears welled as he whispered, "He gave me love through sacrifice." The revelation tore at him, yet it planted something deeper, a fragile seed of understanding that would change him forever. That night, Daniel sat alone again in his apartment, the truth pressing on him with unbearable weight. His father had not abandoned him. He had fought a battle Daniel had never seen. He whispered, "You carried pain so I would not." For years, Daniel's wounds had been built on lies, but the truth opened a new wound, one of gratitude and sorrow entwined. The letter's message was not a command to chase shadows, but a plea to embrace the wisdom hidden in suffering. His father's sacrifice had been an act of love, though hidden in silence. Daniel closed his eyes, tears streaking down his cheeks, and for the first time he felt closer to his father than he had in decades. Yet he knew this revelation was not the end. It was only the beginning. The truth had freed him, but it also demanded he carry it forward. Daniel stood at the edge of his apartment window, staring at the sprawling city glowing beneath the night sky. His father's truth weighed like iron in his chest, a gift of love hidden in sacrifice. Yet the revelation had not brought peace. Instead, it demanded a choice: to live quietly under its shadow or to step forward and face what had once destroyed his father. The words "before it consumes you" rattled like thunder in his mind. His hands trembled as he whispered, "I cannot run anymore." The silence of the room pressed back at him, suffocating, daring him to falter. But inside the fear, something stronger emerged, the beginning of resolve. The storm within him swelled to its peak, and he knew his life would be defined by this moment: surrender or transformation. For the first time, Daniel felt he was standing at the same crossroads his father once faced. The shadows of his dream returned, only now they stood taller, pressing against him like living walls. He saw his reflection multiplied in every surface, eyes hollow, whispering his own doubts back at him. His father's sacrifice was no longer enough. He had to decide if he was strong enough to continue. "I am not you," he muttered, but his own reflection replied in silence. He pounded his fist against the glass until pain shot through his arm. The moment broke him open, grief spilling out in sobs he could not control. Yet in the cracks of despair, a spark ignited, the will to fight. He realized the wisdom his father spoke of was not found in running from darkness, but in standing within it and choosing who he would become. In that instant, Daniel felt his breaking point was also his rebirth. Daniel collapsed onto the floor, clutching the letter to his chest as though it could steady him. The words carved into his memory pulsed like a heartbeat: "Find the truth within." He realized his father had not given him answers, because the answers could only be born from his struggle. His sobs slowed, and in their place came breath, heavy but steady. He whispered, "This is mine to carry." The silence no longer felt suffocating. It felt like space to grow. His body trembled, but his eyes hardened with determination. He was no longer the abandoned child, no longer the man chained to grief. The choice had been made. He would embrace the truth, no matter the cost. In this moment, Daniel knew his father's wisdom was alive within him, waiting to guide him forward. The pain had not broken him, it had shaped him. The night deepened as Daniel rose, exhausted yet transformed. His hands steadied, his breath no longer erratic but full, carrying both sorrow and determination. He looked at the scattered clippings and photographs across his table, each one a fragment of pain, and felt their weight shift from burden to fuel. "You gave me the strength to choose," he said softly, imagining his father's face. The storm inside had not ended, it had become his companion. He would carry it forward, not as chains, but as fire. The city outside pulsed with light, every window a reminder of countless lives entangled with truth and lies, pain and love. Daniel understood that wisdom was not a destination but a battle fought in every breath. He clenched the letter one last time and whispered, "I will not waste what you gave me." The climax of his journey rose within him like a tidal wave, pressing against every fracture in his soul. Daniel closed his eyes and felt the presence of his father, not as memory, but as spirit alive in his veins. The truth no longer haunted him, it empowered him. His wounds became reminders of resilience, his grief transformed into wisdom. He opened the window, letting the cold night air flood the room, washing away the suffocating weight of silence. "I am ready," he declared, his voice firm, steady, no longer the voice of a broken man, but of one reborn. The city seemed to pause, listening, as though even the world knew the storm had turned. Daniel stood at the threshold of his new self, a man no longer defined by what was taken from him, but by what he had chosen to embrace. Morning sunlight broke through the blinds, spilling across Daniel's cluttered table. He sat quietly, staring at the letter one last time. The rage had softened into something heavier but calmer, grief woven with gratitude. He whispered, "You carried the weight I was not ready for." For years he had lived in the shadow of abandonment, but now he understood silence was sacrifice. His father had left a legacy not of absence but of endurance. The pain remained, raw and unhealed, yet it no longer consumed him. Instead, It reminded him of the love buried in choices that cost everything. Daniel breathed deeply, realizing healing was not about erasing wounds, but learning to live alongside them. He placed the letter gently back into the wooden box, not to forget, but to honor. The storm had not ended, but it no longer controlled him. Daniel stepped outside into the fresh air, the city alive with its usual noise. The world had not changed, but he had. He walked with a steadier stride, no longer a man broken by shadows, but one shaped by them. Every face he passed reminded him that pain was universal, that every person carried stories unseen. He thought of his father, not as a ghost of abandonment, but as a man who chose love through sacrifice. "I forgive you," Daniel whispered, the words carried away in the hum of passing cars. The forgiveness did not erase the hurt, but it gave him peace enough to move forward. The truth had not healed him completely, but it had freed him from the prison of lies. He no longer searched for absence, he searched for meaning. And in that search, he found a fragment of wisdom growing quietly inside. Later, Daniel sat in a quiet park, the same place where memories of waiting as a child once tormented him. The bench was still there, weathered and cracked, but it no longer mocked him. He sat with his hands resting loosely on his knees, watching families walk past. Instead of envy, he felt acceptance. He whispered, "I was loved, even if it was in silence." Tears welled, but they were no longer poisoned by anger. They were cleansing, softening the hardened walls around his heart. He remembered Margaret's words, his father's choices, and the letter's final plea. The pieces had come together, not neatly, but enough to understand. The truth was not perfect, and neither was he. But perhaps wisdom was never about perfection. It was about facing imperfection with open eyes. For the first time, Daniel felt the boy inside him begin to rest. As dusk fell, Daniel returned home, the city glowing beneath a sky streaked with fading light. He stood by the window, no longer seeing his reflection as a stranger. He saw himself as both scarred and strong, carrying his father's wisdom within. "The truth did not destroy me," he said softly. "It reshaped me." He let the words linger, realizing that his journey had not ended. It had only shifted. There would always be pain, but it no longer defined him. He carried it as one carries a scar, a reminder of survival and love entwined. The silence of the apartment no longer pressed on him with suffocating weight. It felt spacious, almost welcoming. Daniel understood that closure was not an ending, but a beginning lived differently. The storm had carved him hollow, but from that hollow space, something new had room to grow. Night settled again, but Daniel did not fear it. He sat at his table, the letter tucked away, a candle burning softly nearby. He whispered, "I will carry your silence as strength." His father's absence had shaped him, but it no longer defined him. The wisdom he sought was not a single answer, but the courage to face questions without retreat. He understood now that growth was not found in escaping darkness, but in walking through it with eyes open. The storm within had not disappeared, but it had softened into a rhythm he could live with. He felt both grief and gratitude, intertwined in ways words could not separate. For the first time, Daniel's heart felt steady, anchored by truth. The night outside no longer seemed threatening. It seemed like a companion, vast and quiet, waiting to see who he would become next. The dawn arrived quietly, washing Daniel's apartment in soft light. He stood at the window, watching the city stir awake. For the first time, he did not feel trapped by the world's indifference. He whispered, "I am no longer your shadow, Father. I am my own." The truth still ached, but it no longer tore him apart. He thought of the boy who once waited by the door, and smiled sadly, realizing that boy had finally found rest. The silence in the room felt sacred now, not suffocating. His father's absence had become a presence of its own, woven into every breath. Daniel pressed his palm against the glass, feeling the warmth of sunlight, as though it were a touch from beyond. The storm had given way to a fragile peace. He knew his scars would remain, but they no longer defined him. He was ready for life to begin again. Later that morning, Daniel walked through the streets with a lighter step. Ah! The letter, now returned to its wooden box, rested on his desk as part of his story, not the whole of it. The city seemed brighter, not because it had changed, but because he had. He noticed children laughing, families gathering, and instead of envy, he felt gratitude for the love he had been given, even if hidden. He whispered, "I see you now, Father. I see what you gave me." Every sound, from the rumble of buses to the chatter of strangers, felt alive, connecting him to something larger. For years he had lived as if the world owed him answers, but now he understood. Wisdom was not given. It was created in how one lived. His father's silence had left him wounded, but it had also pushed him toward this moment of clarity. Daniel found himself once again at the park bench, the one where he had waited as a child. This time, he sat with a calm presence, no longer haunted by the emptiness. The bench had not changed, but he had. He traced the worn wood with his fingertips, remembering the ache of loneliness, and felt a deep compassion for the boy he once was. He whispered, "You were never abandoned. You were loved in silence." The truth, though imperfect, had mended something inside him. Families passed by, laughter echoing, and instead of pain, he felt warmth. The past could not be rewritten, but it could be re-understood. Daniel breathed deeply, allowing acceptance to anchor him. He realized wisdom was not found in erasing pain, but in seeing it clearly and still choosing to live. For the first time he felt that the journey had brought him home. As evening fell, Daniel returned to his apartment, standing once more at the cluttered table where the storm had begun. The letter rested inside the box, no longer an enemy, but an heirloom. He lit a single candle, its flame flickering gently against the growing night. "You taught me through silence," he whispered, "and I will carry that wisdom forward." His voice no longer trembled, it carried steadiness, born from pain and transformation. The apartment no longer felt like a prison. It was his sanctuary, shaped by memory and meaning. He closed his eyes, imagining his father's face, and felt not anger, but peace. The storm outside had long ended, but its lesson lived within him. He understood now that life was not about avoiding storms, but about learning to stand firm within them, and letting their scars guide the way. Night blanketed the city, but Daniel did not fear the darkness. He opened his window, letting the cool breeze wash over him. The skyline stretched endlessly, alive with lights that mirrored countless lives. He whispered, "The truth within is not an answer. It is the courage to keep searching." His father's words had once haunted him, but now they had become his compass. Daniel felt changed, not because the pain was gone, but because he had learned to carry it with dignity. His journey had begun in despair, but it ended with clarity. That wisdom is born not in certainty, but in acceptance. He placed his hand over his heart, breathing steadily, and smiled faintly. The story of abandonment had become the story of love, transformed by perspective. As the candle flickered behind him, and the night stretched on, Daniel felt at peace, forever changed.